The morning sun hit the glass of the skyscraper in Santon, but it didn't feel warm to Elias. It felt like a spotlight on a crime scene. Elias stepped out of his car and looked up at the building. His name was at the top, Elias and Associates. He had spent 30 years of his life putting those letters there. He had sacrificed sleep. He had sacrificed time with his children. He had sacrificed his own health to build this empire. But today, as he walked through the lobby, the security guards didn't look him in the eye. They looked at their feet. They knew something he didn't. He took the elevator to the 50th floor. Usually, the office was full of the sound of people talking and phones ringing. But today it was quiet. Too quiet. He walked toward the boardroom, and he heard a laugh. It was a loud, confident laugh. It was the kind of laugh that belonged to someone who owned the world. Elias opened the door, and his heart stopped. Sitting in his chair, the leather chair that was specially made for Elias, was Julian. Julian was 26 years old. He wasn't wearing a tie. He had his feet up on the glass table. Next to him was Sizwe, Elias's oldest friend and the head of operations. Sizwe was leaning in, listening to Julian like he was a prophet. On the table was a small silver tablet, and it was glowing with blue charts and numbers. "Ah, Elias, you're late," Julian said. He didn't stand up. He didn't even move his feet. "We were just looking at the new numbers. Sizwe and I were talking about the legacy departments. We decided to cut them. All of them. Today." Elias felt like he had been punched in the stomach. "The legacy departments?" Elias whispered. "Those are the people who built this company, Julian. Those are the people who stayed with me when we were working out of a garage. You can't just cut them." Julian finally took his feet off the table, but his eyes were like ice. "Elias, stop being so emotional. This is a business, not a charity. Your friends are slow. They use paper. They talk about feelings and relationships. The world doesn't care about feelings anymore. The world cares about speed. My new system does their work in 5 minutes. Why should I pay them for 40 hours? Elias looked at Sizwe. He was waiting for his friend to stand up. He was waiting for Sizwe to say, "Elias is right." But Sizwe wouldn't look at him. Sizwe was busy playing with a new, shiny silver smartwatch on his wrist. "Sizwe," Elias asked. His voice was shaking. "Are you hearing this? These are our people. You were at their weddings. You helped them buy their first houses. Tell him he's wrong." Sizwe finally looked up, but his face was hard. "Elias, Julian is right. The numbers don't lie. We're losing money because we're being too nice. I have a family to think about, too. I have to look at the future. And the future is Julian." The room started to spin. Elias felt the walls closing in. He looked at the board members, men he had known for 20 years. They were all nodding. They were all looking at Julian's glowing blue tablet. They weren't looking at the man who had made them all millionaires. They were looking at the boy who promised them more. "I built this," Elias roared. His voice exploded in the small room. "I bled for this company. I'm a reason you all have shoes on your feet. You can't just push me out." Julian didn't even flinch. He just tapped his tablet. "Actually, Elias, the board has already voted. You're still the CEO on paper, but I am the managing director now. Every decision goes through me. You're here to look good for the news. That's it. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a future to build." Elias walked out of the room. He didn't take his bag. He didn't take his coat. He just walked. He got into his car and drove. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew that his world was breaking. He felt like an old tree in a forest that was being cleared for a parking lot. He was still standing, but the saws were already at his roots. When he got home, the house was quiet. It was a beautiful house, full of expensive art and soft carpets, but it felt like a tomb. He walked into the kitchen and saw Martha. She was making tea. She looked at him, and she knew. She saw the way his shoulders were slumped. She saw the way his hands were shaking. "They did it, Martha," Elias said. His voice was a whisper now, a broken, hollow sound. "They took it. Sizwe, my own brother. He stood there and watched them do it. He chose a watch over me." Martha walked over and tried to put her hand on his shoulder. "Elias, it's just a job. We have enough. We have our health. We have each other. Maybe this is God telling you it's time to rest." Elias snapped. He turned around, and his face was red with fury. "Rest? You want me to rest while that child tears down my life? God didn't give me this company to let a boy disrupt it. I am not done. I will show them who the real king is." He pushed past her and went into his study. He slammed the door so hard a picture fell off the wall and the glass shattered. He didn't care. He sat in the dark. He didn't turn on the lights. He turned on his laptop. The blue light hit his face, making him look like a stranger. He didn't look like a leader anymore. He looked like a hunter. "You want a war, Julian?" Elias hissed into the darkness. "I'll give you a war. I'll find what you're hiding. I'll destroy you before you destroy me." He began to type. His fingers were moving fast. He wasn't thinking about Martha crying in the kitchen. He wasn't thinking about the legacy workers he said he wanted to save. He was only thinking about his own name. He was only thinking about his own pride. The crack in his crown was small, but the darkness was starting to pour in. The clock on the wall of Elias's study went tick, tick, tick. It was the only sound in the house. Elias sat in the dark. The only light was the cold, blue glow from his laptop screen. He didn't look like a successful businessman anymore. He looked like a man who was lost. His hair was messy, and his eyes were red from staring at the screen for hours. He wasn't thinking about the work he loved. He wasn't thinking about the people he helped. He was only thinking about Julian. He began to dig into Julian's life. He went past the news articles. He went past the awards. He went deep into the internet, looking at old social media posts and college records. He was looking for a crack. He was looking for a lie. "Nobody is this perfect," Elias whispered to the empty room. "Everyone has a secret, and I'm going to find yours." He felt a strange energy in his chest. It wasn't the good energy of building a company. It was the dark energy of a man trying to destroy another human being. Suddenly, he found something. It was an old video from a university debate. Julian was 20 years old. He looked young and hungry. In the video, Julian was talking about winning at all costs. He said, "If you want to be the best, you have to be willing to do things others won't. You have to be willing to change the truth to fit your goal." Elias froze the video. He leaned in so close he could see the pixels on the screen. He smiled, but it was a scary, cold smile. "I got you," Elias hissed. His voice sounded like a snake. "You want to talk about the future? I'm going to show them that your future is built on lies." He spent the next few hours editing the video. He cut it in a way that made Julian look like a thief. He made it look like Julian was admitting to fraud. Elias knew it wasn't the whole truth. He knew the video was just a young student being arrogant. But Elias didn't care about the truth anymore. He only cared about winning his chair back. The door to the study opened slowly. Martha stood there in her nightgown. She looked tired and sad. "Elias, it is 3 a.m, she said softly. "Please, come to bed." "You are shaking." Elias didn't even turn his head. He didn't want to look at her. He was afraid that if he looked at her, he would see how far he had fallen. "Not now, Martha," he said. His voice was hard. I'm busy saving our life." Martha walked into the room and stood behind him. She looked at the screen. She saw Julian's face. She saw the hate in the way Elias was clicking the mouse. "This isn't saving our life, Elias," she whispered. "This is killing your soul. Do you remember what we used to say? We used to say that if God is for us, who could be against us? Why are you fighting like a man who has no God?" Elias stood up so fast his chair hit the floor. He turned around and pointed his finger at her. "Don't preach to me, Martha. Where was God when Sizwe turned his back on me? Where was God when that child took my office? I am the one who has to fight. I am the one who built this empire, and I am the one who will protect it." Martha stepped back, her eyes wide with fear. She didn't recognize the man standing in front of her. She left the room without saying another word. Elias sat back down, but his heart was pounding in his ears. He felt a small pinch of guilt in his stomach, but he pushed it down. He told himself that he was doing this for her. He told himself that he was doing this for the company. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was doing this for his own pride. He clicked the save button on the video file. He titled it, "The Truth About Julian." The next morning, Elias didn't eat breakfast. He didn't even drink his coffee. He just put on his suit and grabbed his laptop. He looked at himself in the mirror. He looked sharp. He looked powerful, but his eyes were empty. He felt like a soldier going to a war that he wasn't sure he could win. He drove back to the skyscraper in Santon. He didn't look at the sky. He didn't look at the people on the street. He only looked at the road ahead. He walked into the office. The young workers looked at him and then looked away. They could feel the tension coming off him. Elias walked straight to the boardroom. He didn't wait for an invitation. He pushed the doors open. Julian was there, laughing with the board members. They were drinking expensive coffee and looking at the new holographic charts. Julian looked up and smiled that fake, polite smile. "Elias, good to see you. We were just about to start the strategy meeting." Elias didn't smile back. He walked to the head of the table. He didn't say hello to the board members. He didn't look at Sizwe. He just plugged his laptop into the big screen. The room went quiet. The air felt heavy. "I have something to show you," Elias said. His voice was steady but cold. "You all think Julian is the future. You think he is a genius. But I have found the man behind the mask. And he isn't who you think he is." Julian leaned back in his chair. He didn't look worried. He looked curious. He took a sip of his coffee and nodded. "Go ahead, Elias. Show us. We are all ears." Elias hit the play button. The video of the young Julian filled the screen. The board members watched in silence. Elias stood back, his arms crossed. He felt like he had finally won. He felt like the king was back on his throne. But as the video played, the faces of the board members didn't change to anger. They changed to something else, something much worse than anger. They changed to pity. The video finished playing. The younger Julian on the screen stopped talking, and the room went silent. Elias stood tall by the projector. He adjusted his maroon tie and looked around the room. He was waiting for the board members to start shouting. He was waiting for them to point their fingers at Julian and call him a fraud. He was waiting for Sizwe to realize he had picked the wrong side. Elias felt like a hero who had just saved the kingdom. But nobody moved. The chairman of the board, an older man with white hair, didn't look at Julian. He looked at Elias. His face was full of deep sadness. "Elias," the chairman said softly, "why did you do this?" Elias blinked. He was confused. "Why?" "Because he is a liar. You saw the video. He admitted to cheating clients. He is a snake in a light blue suit." Elias pointed his finger at Julian, but his hand was starting to shake. Julian slowly stood up. He didn't look angry. He didn't look scared. He looked like he was watching a sad movie. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen and sent a file to the main projector. "Elias," Julian said, and his voice was very quiet. "I showed the board that video 3 weeks ago. During my first interview, I told them about my mistakes when I was a student. I told them how much I regretted being that arrogant kid." A second video started playing on the big screen. It was the same video, but it was longer. In the part Elias had cut out, the younger Julian looked at the camera and said, "But I was wrong. I learned that honesty is the only way to build something that lasts. If you don't have integrity, you have nothing." The board members looked at Elias. They didn't see a hero. They saw a man who had lied and cheated to stay in power. They saw a man who was so full of pride that he was willing to destroy a young man's life. "Elias," the chairman said, his voice becoming hard, "we were going to offer you a seat of honor. We were going to call the new training center the Elias Academy. But after this, after you try to trap a colleague with a fake video, we cannot have you here. Not as a CEO, not as a consultant, not as anything." The chairman stood up and looked at the rest of the board. "I believe we are ready to vote. All in favor of Julian taking full control immediately." One by one, every hand at the table went up. Even Sizwe, especially Sizwe. He didn't even look at Elias as he raised his hand. It was the fastest vote in the history of the company. In 10 seconds, 30 years of work vanished. Elias felt like he was falling down a dark hole. His ears were ringing. He looked at Julian, and for the first time, Julian didn't look arrogant. He looked disappointed. Julian walked over to the head of the table, Elias's spot, and sat down. "Security will help you pack your things, Elias," Julian said. He wasn't mocking him. He was just stating a fact. "Please leave the laptop and the key card on the desk. You're no longer authorized to be in this building." Elias tried to speak. He wanted to say it was all a mistake. He wanted to say he was sorry, but the words wouldn't come out. His throat felt like it was full of sand. He turned around and walked out of the room, leaving his pride and his life's work behind him. He walked past the young workers. They weren't whispering anymore. They were just silent. They watched him go like he was a ghost. He went to his office, but the lock was already changed. A security guard, a man Elias had hired 10 years ago, was standing there. "I'm sorry, Mr. Elias," the guard said. He looked at the floor. "I have orders. I have to escort you to the lobby." Elias nodded. He didn't fight. He didn't shout. He just walked toward the elevator. When he reached the lobby, he saw his car waiting for him. He got inside and drove. He didn't go home to Martha. He couldn't. How could he tell her she was right? How could he tell her he had lost everything because of his own hate? He drove to a small park across from the skyscraper. He sat on a bench and watched the sun go down. He watched the lights of his building turn on. He was on the outside looking in. He had tried to protect his crown, but he had only succeeded in burning down his palace. He was truly replaced, and he had done it to himself. Elias sat on the park bench until the sun was completely gone. The cold air of the night bit through his charcoal suit, but he didn't feel it. The only thing he felt was the heavy weight in his chest. He looked at his phone. There were 20 missed calls from Martha. He couldn't answer her. He couldn't even look at her name on the screen. He felt like a failure. He felt like a man who had built a house on sand and watched the tide come in. He finally stood up and walked back to his car. But when he reached the parking spot, his car was gone. In its place stood 2 men in black suits. They weren't his security guards. They were from the bank. "Mr. Elias?" one of the men asked. He held a clipboard. "The company car has been recalled. Your personal accounts have also been frozen pending the investigation into the video editing. We have orders to take the vehicle immediately." Elias didn't fight. He didn't even argue. He just handed them the keys and watched his luxury sedan drive away into the night. He had to take a taxi home. A taxi. For 30 years, he had been driven in the best cars money could buy. Now he was sitting in the back of a small, smelling car, looking at the city he used to own. When he reached his mansion, the gates were open. The lights were off. He walked through the front door, and the silence was louder than a scream. He walked into the kitchen, expecting to see Martha, but the room was empty. There was only a small note on the table. "I cannot watch you destroy yourself anymore," the note said. Martha's handwriting was shaky. "I'm staying at the guest house. I am praying for you, Elias. Not for your company, but for your soul. Please find the man I married, because right now, I don't know who you are." Elias crumpled the paper in his hand. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to shout, but he had no breath left. He sank to the kitchen floor and put his head in his hands. The next few days were a nightmare. The news was everywhere. Elias and Associates, founder fired for fraud. The headlines were cruel. People he had known for decades stopped answering his calls. Even the local shops where he used to buy his expensive cigars told him his credit was no longer good. He was a ghost walking through his own life. He spent his days sitting in his study, but he didn't turn on the laptop. He just sat in the dark, listening to the house groan. One evening, Elias ran out of food. He walked to the small grocery store down the street. He was wearing an old, oversized gray hoodie and baggy track pants. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a broken old man. As he stood in line to pay for bread and milk, he saw a young man behind the counter. The boy was wearing a name tag that said Samuel. Samuel was looking at a textbook between customers. He looked tired, but his eyes were bright. "Are you okay, sir?" Samuel asked. He looked at Elias with kindness. He didn't recognize the famous businessman. He only saw a man who looked like he had lost his way. Elias looked at the boy and felt a lump in his throat. "I'm just tired," Elias whispered. Samuel nodded. "I get it. I'm working 3 jobs to pay for my business degree. It's hard. Sometimes I want to quit. But my mother says that even in the valley, there's a path. You just have to keep walking. Elias took his bread and walked out, but Samuel's words stuck in his mind. Even in the valley, there's a path. He went back to his mansion, but he didn't go inside. He walked to the small guest house in the back of the garden. He stood outside the door for a long time. He could hear Martha singing at him inside. Her voice was soft and beautiful. It was a song about grace. Elias realized then that he had spent his whole life building a kingdom for himself, but he had forgotten to build a life for God. He sat on the porch of the guest house and cried. They weren't the angry tears of a man who lost his job. They were the tears of a man who realized he had lost his heart. He looked up at the stars, and for the first time in years, he didn't ask for his company back. He didn't ask for revenge on Julian. He whispered a simple sentence into the night. I am lost. Please show me the way back. The pride that had been a mountain in his heart was finally starting to crumble into dust. The door to the guest house opened slowly. Martha stood there, holding a warm lamp. She didn't say anything. She just looked at Elias, sitting on the porch in his old hoodie. She saw the tear tracks on his face. She saw that the hardness in his jaw was gone. Elias stood up slowly. He didn't look like a king anymore. He looked like a man who had finally come home. I'm sorry, Martha, he whispered. I was building a kingdom for a man who didn't exist. I am ready to be the man God made me to be. Martha smiled, and the warmth of that smile was worth more than every share in his old company. Weeks passed. Elias didn't go back to Santon. He didn't check the stock market. Instead, he returned to the small grocery store. He found Samuel, the young man who was working 3 jobs. But Elias didn't come to buy bread this time. He came to offer something else. He sat with Samuel in a small, noisy cafe. Elias was wearing a simple blue denim shirt and khaki pants. He looked younger. He looked at Samuel's business plan, a plan for a delivery service in the township. This is good, Samuel, Elias said, but you're thinking too small. You're worried about the bikes. Don't worry about the bikes. Worry about the trust of the people. For the next 3 hours, Elias taught. He didn't talk about winning at all costs. He talked about service. He talked about integrity. He realized that his 30 years of experience weren't for a skyscraper. They were for this moment, sitting across from a young boy who had a dream but no guide. Elias wasn't the CEO anymore. He was a mentor. He was a father. One afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up to the cafe. Julian stepped out. He was wearing a dark charcoal turtleneck. He looked tired. He sat down across from Elias. The silence between them was long, but it wasn't cold. The board is fighting, Elias, Julian said, looking at his hands. They want profits faster than the technology can grow. Sizwe is already looking for another job. I thought I wanted the crown, but I didn't realize how heavy it was. Elias looked at the young man who had replaced him. He didn't feel anger. He felt a strange kind of love. The crown is only heavy when you wear it alone, Julian, Elias said softly. I tried to destroy you because I was afraid of being forgotten. But I realized that my legacy isn't my name on a building. It's the knowledge I passed to you. Julian looked up, surprised. Elias reached into his bag and pulled out a notebook. It was full of his personal notes on leadership and crisis management. He pushed it across the table. Take it. You'll need it for the next board meeting. Julian took the book like it was made of gold. Thank you, Elias. They shook hands. Not as enemies, but as 2 builders from different times. As Julian drove away, Elias felt a lightness in his chest. He walked back into the township, where a group of young entrepreneurs were waiting for him. He was no longer the man in the 50th floor office. He was a man in the street, helping others rise. He had lost his company, but he had found his calling. Elias realized that being replaced wasn't a curse. It was a gift. It was God's way of moving him from a place of pride to a place of purpose. He looked at the sunset over the horizon. He wasn't worried about tomorrow. He knew that as long as he stayed humble and kept his heart open, his next chapter would be the greatest one yet. The moral lesson. Sometimes, life removes us from a position of power to save us from a position of pride. Elias thought his value was in his title, but but his true value was in his character and the wisdom he could share. When we stop fighting for our own glory, we finally find the glory God has planned for us. Question for you. Have you ever felt like you were being replaced or cast aside? Did you respond with anger like Elias did at first, or did you look for the new path God was opening for you? Let us know in the comments below. Renew your mind. Write your next chapter.